Welcome to this event in the 2020 Portobello Book Festival. My name is May Shaw and I'm a member of the organising group. The festival is organised annually by a local group of enthusiastic readers and writers in conjunction with and in support of the local public library. Books featured can be found at the Portobello Bookshop. I would like to thank today's contributors for their willingness to participate in this reconfigured festival. Thank you for joining us and we hope you enjoy it.
Hi, my name is Keith Skene. I'm director of the Biosphere Research Institute. I'm an ecologist and a writer. And today I want to talk about resolving the climate emergency, why societal and environmental sustainability are interdependent. Over the next 40 minutes, I'll try to break down the subject and explain it to you. And then I'm going to do a reading from my book, Artificial Intelligence and the Environmental Crises. So let's get started. What is essential when you try to deal with any problem, including the climate problem, is to separate out causes from consequences. Yeah, we've got changes happening, greater risk of fire, flooding, intense drought in places. These are all consequences or symptoms, but the causes are much more fundamental. It's the way that we, as humans, understand our being and existence within the context of our environment. And so the cures must address that rather than dealing with the symptoms. If you get measles, there's no point in removing all of the little spots. That won't cure the illness. You must go much deeper than that in order to address the problem. And that's the same with climate change. And that's what I want to talk about today. Discovering the real issues and then addressing them. It's very important to stress that it's not just carbon. We are faced with a multitude of problems. Soil erosion. We've lost half the soil in the last 150 years. Salinization, destroying large areas of formerly fertile land. Eutrophication, poisoning our rivers and lakes because of agricultural runoff involving highly toxic pesticides and insecticides. Global biodiversity collapse. It's surrounding us, and we're hearing more and more how much we've lost in just the last number of decades. And to understand how we're doing all this, we need to understand the three arenas within which human activity takes place. There's the economic arena, the societal arena, and the environmental arena. And these have been set out in a very, very familiar little set of three circles, so commonly seen now in sustainability literature. And the golden arrow of sustainability looks at the overlap of these three sets of activities: economics, the environment, and society. And there's this special area where they all overlap and everything looks like it's going to be beautiful and rosy. But really, what is the real world sort of identity in terms of our activities? I would argue that it's very, very different than that. The current economic model really only sees two players: economics and society. The Earth system, way up here in the far upper left corner, is merely used as a source and a sink. We take things from it to make stuff, and we throw the stuff away after we've used it and dump it back into the Earth system as waste. And our unit of well-being is very much tied to economics. Wealth, health, and education, all paid for by profit. Happiness, status, plenty, they're all generated from having lots of cash, or so we're told. My GDP is greater than yours. We look down on other countries who've got low GDPs, because the GDP is the sign, the virility sign, really, of economic growth. Adam Smith, the famous Scottish economist and writer and philosopher, set out the new economic model during the Enlightenment originally in the 1700s. And he wrote two books. The first of them was A Theory of Moral Sentiments, and the second, more famously, A Wealth of Nations. Now, in the first book, he showed that society resonates with individuals within it. And that resonance, if working properly, leads to a very sort of positive, caring and sharing approach, where although we are working for our own interests, those interests are tempered by the interests of society, this functioning society. And this would affect our economics and our transactions within the economy by what's called the invisible hand. It would nurture and tend so that this didn't run out of control. The idea of a free economy, an open economy, a laissez-faire approach that wasn't sort of held back, could only work if society took on that kind of moral responsibility to control it, really. And this is what Smith put forward. So he'd be horrified at the way it's turned out, no doubt. Because the way it's turned out, of course, has generated the wealth, health and education and so on that he foresaw, but it's also led to things like zero-hour contracts, increasing inequality, debt, environmental devastation, societal dislocation and the rise of individualism. And this ended up cutting off the invisible hand, this I'm all right Jack attitude. And so we see now that the society has been replaced by the individual. It's about individual well-being. And really, we're just the labour for the economic machine that's operating. But Delaney in 2005 writes, the tolerance of the poor for the existence of the wealthier classes depends on a belief in economic growth, which is a very interesting statement. So in a way, it's important to have the dream of a wonderful future held before us like a carrot on a stick in order for us to basically tolerate the increasing gap between the rich and the poor. Margaret Seconder, as I said, nature has fixed no limits on our hopes. And basically this source sink deal with the Earth system means that it's becoming further and further diminished, but it's completely out with the sort of accelerating individualism that is rampant across the planet. Yet the current economic model delivers nothing but bad things. The Earth system, in terms of being used as a source, we get deforestation, overfishing, fertilizers, pesticides, mining waste, salinization and soil erosion. The stuff we dump back in leads to climate destabilization with carbon dioxide levels building up, ozone depletion because of the CCFs, plastic and other waste building up in the oceans. And also we're getting a societal collapse as individualism runs rampant. And therefore it is the end of the invisible hand and of the hope of Adam Smith in terms of controlling the free economy. And it's really quite ironic, isn't it, that to get away from Malthus's horsemen of the apocalypse, famine, disease and war, we have replaced these with our own modern horsemen of the apocalypse, climate destabilization, pollution and diversity collapse. And these, of course, will lead to famine, disease and war, ultimately. But meanwhile, in the real world, far from this economic sort of fantasy that we're becoming engulfed in, the Earth system is actually the only show in town. And we as a society are just one of many species that inhabit this Earth, and our little economic model, as destructive as it is really a minor inconvenience for the bigger system, because the Earth system will carry on and will respond to the attack and onslaught from ourselves, but in such a way as to continue as a system, potentially rejecting us. And this is the existential threat we are considering at present. And so the only solution is a happy Earth system. It is the only show in town, and we need to reintegrate with it rather than attempt to continue down our path of ignorance. But how do we reintegrate with the Earth system? If we are to reintegrate back into the Earth system and have a sustainable future, the only way to do it is to get to grips with what the Earth system actually is. What does it mean to be an Earth system? And what does it mean to reintegrate with that system? The first thing to realize is that the Earth system is the same as any other complex system. And so we can use systems theory, as the theory about how systems work, to understand it. And there are 5 basic characteristics of any complex system that are very, very relevant to our own sustainability in terms of having a future on the planet. And the first one is that complex systems are self-organizing. What that means is that nature has built into it a whole set of instructions that allows it to rebuild itself if it becomes damaged in any way. And this is an incredible thing. It doesn't need human interference. It doesn't need a disaster emergency committee or a United Nations or a university research lab to work out how to save it. It saves itself all the time. And throughout its long, long history, 3.8 billion years, it has continually recovered from disasters, massive disasters, huge comets hitting the planet. A time when the Earth was covered in a thick ice sheet. All of these things were overcome, and the Earth system continued because it could self-organize and rebuild. But we don't need to go back to the dinosaurs to see this rebuilding process. Go down any sand dune succession right at the mouth of some of the big rivers that flow out to sea, and you'll find above and below these estuaries beautiful examples of nature reorganizing itself. We see sand dunes building up. Many of these areas have been converted into golf courses. That's where the sand bunkers originally come from, of course. But if you go to a beautiful area like Tensmuir, the old course in St Andrews is a classic example of this. We see a gradual build-up of dunes. Vegetation comes in, then it's replaced by other vegetation, and eventually we end up with a forest and a highly complex kind of ecology going on. And this is all done without our interference. There's nobody planting it. There's nobody plucking things out. It's nature working, rebuilding itself, organizing itself. We can see this after great disasters like volcanic eruptions, like at Mount St Helens, for instance. We can see this after huge fires. Nature rebuilds every time. If we think of buildings, for instance, the Taufsberger Spy Center on top of a hill made from the rubble from World War II, just outside Berlin, it's now been overgrowing for maybe about 30 years since the end of the Cold War, and nature has reclaimed it. Here we see a much older structure, the Ta Prohm set of temples in Cambodia, and this has been overgrown as well over many, many hundreds of years in this case. Dinosaurs are a classic example. They ruled the Earth for maybe 150 million years, but they're all gone now. But they've been replaced by lots of other things. And therefore, life is continually recreating itself and reorganizing after various disturbances, if we could call them like that. And it will continue to do that. And the disturbances that we are creating will be overcome as well. The second great characteristic of any complex system is emergence. Emergence is a fascinating thing. The complexity is so huge that we cannot predict the direction of where things will go, and equally importantly, the properties of the system don't belong to any one level of organization. So we as humans do not control the system. The system is an emergent entity, and that's crucial to grasp. Let's explore this in a bit more detail. Emergence is all about where 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. In Legoland, we can build little blocks up, take a block away, put it back on somewhere else, and we can reconstruct things. This is this reductionist sort of fairy tale that we think we can do this with the Earth system. It doesn't work like that. Complex interactions of the parts give rise to properties that only belong to the whole system in the end. And the massive number of interactions are such that these things will work their way through in ways that we cannot predict. We can look at lots of emergent properties. If we think of the little termites here building these incredible termite mines, these mines are extremely complex. They've got their own air conditioning system. They extend underground as well. And yet these tiny little creatures with minute brains work together as a social entity. And from it emerges this incredible architecture that wouldn't be able to be done by any single one of these, or imagined even. Our dream world, our imagination, comes from a set of neurons that are all connected up in our brains. We can imagine amazing things and terrible things. We can wake in panic from a nightmare that's so vivid we're actually shaking or sweating as we emerge from the dream. And that's another emergent. Two other really, really interesting examples of emergence are world religions and culture. And what we see here is world religions are a fascinating thing. They build up in particular parts of the world, and they differ very, very dramatically from each other. They're very often linked to landscape. They're very often linked to the events that happen, the uncertainty of events that happen in particular areas. And they are phenomenally different. They embrace architecture. They embrace sort of statues, for example. It's an extraordinary statue we can see here. And culture is another great example. Here's Haight-Ashbury, the centre of the hippie movement in the 1960s. And this amazing event it's really circulated around so many different things. It emerged with its implications for fashion, for music, for art, for political ideology, and for philosophy. And this whole emergent cultural reality could not be designed by any single person, but rather it came from within society. Another classic example of emergence. The third great property of any complex system is nonlinearity. Nonlinearity explores some very, very important issues and aspects that we need to be very aware of. Small changes can create huge effects, way, way beyond what we could imagine. These so-called tipping points. And these can be for the good or for the bad. So if we start doing the right things and think like a system and act as part of a system, then we can have dramatically good things start to happen much faster than we thought. But if we carry on the way we are, we will see dramatically bad things happening much faster than we thought. We are used to sort of linear systems. Take this train track here from, we see it going from Walthamstow Central right out to Brixton. And if we take this track, we will pass through the same stations every time we take it. It doesn't change, it doesn't alter. It just goes from A to B to C to D and finally to the final destination at Brixton. That's the way it is. It's got a track, it follows it, it's linear. However, nature isn't like that. Nature is non-linear. So what do I mean by this? Well, if we think of nature with its millions of different components, all interacting together, we can see it as a mass of little arrows between everything. And each thing is signaling to everything else, and then that affects what happens it. And these arrows can increase or decrease depending on the overall system characteristics. And this can lead to an extraordinarily complicated turn of events. And this has been compared to the French flag in what we call the French flag hypothesis. Here we see the x-axis and the y-axis and this nice straight line of gradual change going through on the graph. So as we increase x, we increase y. So this might be temperature, for instance, of the planet. But what we notice in the French flag hypothesis is that it doesn't say constant. For the first part of increase, we're in the blue part. But then suddenly, with a tiny incremental increase, we switch to a and then to a red part. And this is a great example of nonlinearity. While the actual change of temperature is very slow, we suddenly get dramatic changes in terms of the overall functioning of the system. And that's what happens with nonlinearity. It's a very, very concerning thing Because if you think of gradual temperature change, we can suddenly get a release of methane from the areas of the tundra that are thawing out, for instance, in Siberia at present. This will then escalate everything and change things. And change it can be very non-linear, which is a worrying aspect. The fourth great characteristic of any system, including the Earth system, is that these systems are suboptimal at lower levels. So, for example, we as humans need to act suboptimally in order to optimize the functioning of the system. If we try to optimize for ourselves, it will be disastrous. This is a difficult thing to grasp sometimes because we often talk about eco-efficiency and all of this kind of language, which tends to steer us towards thinking, oh, we need to be really efficient, we need to be really optimal. Also, there's a drive to make things great for us. We're not really willing to sacrifice, and that is a massive problem. Let's examine this a little bit because it's very important. Here we've got a harried boss and she's got her 6 staff around. Each of them are demanding an hour of her time. But she's only got an hour because she's got lots of really important meetings for the rest of the day. So what does she do? Does she spend the hour with her star worker and give her all the time to her because she's really good and just ignore the other 5? Of course, instead, we could have solution space 2, where the boss decides to give 10 minutes to each of her staff. Everyone is getting a suboptimal amount of time. Nobody's getting the hour they really want, but they're getting some time. This allows her to keep in touch with her staff and her staff to have direct interaction with the boss. And this allows the whole system to work. It's suboptimal for each one of these individuals, but it works well for the entire organization because everybody gets something. Yeah. Let's explore this from another direction. Let's meet Cyril the squirrel. He's just coming back from a long day of harvesting nuts and hiding them in stashes like squirrels do. And he goes past his local shop, and outside it is the advertisement for the most popular newspaper for squirrels, the Squirrel Advertiser. And on page 36, in a small corner ad, he reads, "Are you a squirrel who forgets where you hid your nuts? You need the Nut app. Compatible with all handheld devices, latest technology, finds 99% of your nut stashes, plus some you didn't even bury." Wow, this was transitional. This was transformative. He couldn't believe it. He quickly ran home, ordered one, and loaded it up onto his mobile device. And soon all the squirrels were getting these things. It was amazing. They could find all their nuts. The population grew. They became stronger. They began to really dominate. They were healthy, feeling great. And then spring came, and there were so many squirrels now having baby squirrels that they needed lots and lots of bird eggs, because squirrels eat bird eggs in spring to help produce the extra protein needed for their offspring. They feed them to their offspring. And they also, this is obviously a very important nutritional element. And so, because there's so many of them now, and they're also strong and virile, they basically eat all the bird eggs. The bird population collapses. And by the next year, as spring arrives, the birds aren't eating the insects because there aren't any birds. The insects then take over and completely lead to defoliation of the forest. The forest collapses. It doesn't produce acorns the next year. And so the squirrels all starve to death. Oh, what a stupid thing. Why did they get this nut app? I mean, it's so obvious. You know, getting a nut app, making more efficient harvesting. You know what I mean? Hang on a sec. It's exactly what we're doing. It's exactly what we do. And this optimizing for the human race is what's destroying the planet more than anything else. We need to be suboptimal. We need to embrace suboptimality. Humans proclaimed we can do a better job than nature. Progress and the Enlightenment dogma preaches that nature has fixed no limits to our hopes. But limits are a natural outcome of a properly functioning system. The old harvesting methods would leave lots of grain on the ground, and this was great for the granivores, such as the sparrows, who could feed on this. But now we hoover up every last grain, and the populations of these granivores are collapsing across the planet. This is optimizing. And ironically, trade-offs, or suboptimality, is actually a sign of a working system. We should expect to be suboptimal, not efficient. Optimization for any single level is a disaster for the system. We need to reflect on John Donne's words from 1624 in his devotions upon emergent occasions. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And by recognizing that, we realize the sacrifices and trade-offs we need to make in order for the entire system to work. The final characteristic, and maybe the most crucial and the one that ties together all of these, is that complex systems are involved in constant feedback. And this leads to the resonance and integration that allows a given individual to be part of a system and to benefit from it, and for the system to succeed. Feedback and information are the lifeblood of any functioning system. They inform us of what trade-offs we need to make. This huge amount of data is needed for emergence and for self-organization, and it establishes these dynamic equilibria, forever changing, yet forever intact. And they form the basis of these four crucial things: inclusivity, our actions being responsible within the system; integrity, identity, and meaning. And these are all key things that we search for in our lives. And yet they are all there for the taking if feedback and information are flowing constantly through us. And therefore, I cannot stress more the importance of active listening. Now, how do we listen to nature and to the Earth system? I mean, how do we do that? Well, we used to be able to do it fine, but we've lost this ecological intelligence that many indigenous people still have, but we've seemed to have lost it. And so I'm suggesting two really important elements to us surviving. First one is societal reintegration. So we need to place ourselves within nature again, within its contexts, and be aware of it. And the second, maybe more controversial one, is the use of technology. We have 7 billion smart devices on and around our planet. And the Internet of Things, of course, is the sort of feeding of all this information into the infosphere, as we call it. Artificial intelligence, if properly organized, can allow the rapid assimilation of this data and us to learn from it, to communicate it to us. How are we doing? How's the planet doing? What impact are we having on the planet? And I've set out a number of ways that we can approach this. I've really focused on urban renewal because 55% of the population of humans live in cities currently, and this is set to rise to 70% by 2050. So this is the bulk of the people, really. And in a way, it's the most difficult. If you live out in a little village like I do in Angus, beautiful rolling hills, forest right outside my window here, it's idyllic, and it's not difficult to be part of nature. You can go out and walk through it every day, which is a beautiful experience. But if you're living in a city, there are challenges there. So how can we alter and change this? Well, I've set out 3 key directions: seeing is believing, corridors for change, and legendary ledges. The first of these major ideas is seeing is believing. This is all to do with exposing the population to nature and helping them reintegrate. It restores a resonance with nature, an understanding of it, and an awakening of the ecological intelligence within us to help us make the right decisions and to help us reintegrate more willingly. It calls for a cultural renewal where landscape informs society, and we get this invisible hand really operating between the ecology and society. And this is fundamental. I'm certainly not the first person to talk about this. Patrick Geddes, the great town planner from Perth, just up the road here, basically set out a vision of this. And he did extraordinary work in many cities around the world, including Edinburgh, of course, redesigning them to bring together the natural landscape and the urbanite society, even in a large-scale city like Edinburgh. Magnacchi, the great Italian territorialist, also put these ideas forward. A wonderful thinker, bringing together the place, the environment, the people, the work, with the traditions as well, all integrating to give the place an identity and to give the people a link to everything. And therefore, they are then resonating and able to fully experience and celebrate their environment. The second core idea here is what I'm calling corridors for change. These are natural green corridors that crisscross the city. And this allows people to cycle safely and within natural or semi-natural environments, and therefore experience the seasonality, the smells, the freshness, the beauty of nature on their way to work. What a great chill out. It also allows them to integrate more with nature, because these corridors will bring nature in from surrounding areas. Classic examples are Sheffield. Here we've got parkland all the way through the city that connects out into the Peak District. And this means that this beautiful area that surrounds Sheffield is brought into the city centre, and nobody's very far from nature. And actually a lot of the wildlife comes down these corridors right into the city centre as well, allowing people to see a lot of the really unusual birds and animals that occupy this whole area. The second great example is Valencia. I visited there a couple of years ago, and it's quite extraordinary. This Turia parkland runs right through the city. And when you're in it, you can't even see the city. You're not even aware of it. It's full of forested areas. It's full of exercise equipment. It's full of cycle paths and pavements and all sorts of other things that make you feel you're out in the country, even though you're in the middle of one of the biggest cities in Spain. It's quite an extraordinary thing. And it was developed from draining a river that was flooding the city regularly. And they diverted the river and turned the river bed into this amazing park, some 5 kilometers long. Absolutely wonderful. Wonderful thing. If we look like a city of Dundee, there are green spaces there. You can see here they're dotted all around, but what they're not is that they're not connected, and they're not connected to the surrounding nature out with. What I'm suggesting is that we combine cycle and footpaths going across the town. And the council are considering this at present, which will lead to healthy and safe transport, will lead to corridors for wildlife to come and go that can come right into the city, and will introduce people more to the peace, the tranquility, the freshness, the changing seasonality of our environment. So rather than these cycle lanes that we're seeing popping up in cities, for instance in Portland here in the States, I'd much rather see proper green corridors with the cycle paths and the pavements running through them. And this is a much better way to go. And this is an example from Valencia again. Legendary ledges, finally. I think that it's so important that everybody can grow something. And it only has to be one small plant that they can get something from. Maybe some parsley, you know. I grow all sorts of herbs on our window ledges in the shell. It's got a big vegetable plot out the back as well. Not a huge one, but fairly reasonable sized one. But I've also got stuff growing on the windowsills. And I think we need to supply all tenants with window baskets, because basically they can't get access to a garden space very often. It's really difficult. But if you give them a window, basket, they can grow things on it. And that can be wonderfully transformative for the adults and for the children, to see food growing and then to eat some of that food. I really feel we need about 25% of school grounds converted to vegetable fruit patches. The kids could spend, each class could spend an hour each week tending them and looking after them. And then you can have a great celebration in the harvest time in the autumn, when the school staff and the parents can all get together with the kids, and we can feast on the food that's been produced by the school garden and share it out to the community. Even more importantly, we should reinvest in allotments. So important. The allotment's an amazing thing for cities, but many of them have been destroyed and sold. But we need to re-establish these. These are essential to reconnect with nature. Finally, fruiting trees and shrubs should be grown on council estates rather than just, trees that don't produce any fruit. Get some plum trees in there, some apple trees. Get some, black currant bushes in there. And then we can enjoy the fruits. I love picking fruit from the black currant bushes that grow wild around the edges of the village. It's wonderful. And so we need to do all of this, I think, to reintroduce a communication and a link with nature and its productivity. All of these will also bring lots of wildlife in and benefit these creatures as they can eat the nectar produced by the flowers of many of these plants, for example. So well done, you've stuck with this really well. Let me just summarize what we've talked about, and then I'm going to give you a reading of my new book. First of all, the climate emergency is a consequence, a symptom of a much greater malaise. The true cause of all of the chaos is the decontextualization of humanity from the Earth system. We have separated ourselves increasingly from it, lost our ecological intelligence, and lost our identity, therefore, and our meaning. The Earth system is the only show in town. Economics is not. It will continue with or without us. It is a very important thing, and we rely completely on it ultimately for our existence. So now is the time for humility, for sacrifice, and for reintegration. Sacrifice means trade-offs, suboptimality, allowing nature to run its course, allowing the system to function as a whole, while each element of the system trades off in order for the overall system to be strong and to continue forward. Of course, the Earth system will continue forward, but maybe not with us as part of it. The lifeboat is there. We just need to climb back on board. Once again, thank you so much for listening to my thoughts on this subject. If you're interested in the book, it's available from the Festival Bookshop or online, or I know Blackwell's store it in Edinburgh. And please visit us at our website at www.biasride.org. There's lots of material there, all relating to sustainability. So please drop by and check out what we've got. So I want to finish with a reading of the final chapter of my book, Artificial Intelligence and the Environmental Crisis. Requiem for the King of Phrygia. Ultimately, a functioning ecocentric society can only be a positive thing in terms of social as well as environmental sustainability. The benefits are manifold and priceless. You can't buy a focused, active, collective community. Any government worth its salt should realise this and work towards these 8 goals. Any government that helps deliver such a rejuvenated society will also benefit at so many levels. Undoubtedly, social spending will decrease as a functioning society will have less need for support, and this is likely to be replicated in areas such as health, social work and policing. All of the barriers we have mentioned earlier can be overcome by a society working together, in tune with the Earth system and accountable for their impact on the planet. It is as simple and as difficult as that. Societal transition needs organisation and support, but once working, it will build its own resilience. Emergent structures will result. We don't know what this will look like, but we do know that this will be a place of healthy environments and healthy societies, replete with equality, empowerment and cohesiveness. What's not to like? Artificial intelligence provides the feedback and motivation like no other technology has ever done. It is a harbinger for good when used in this context and can facilitate and empower the process and the people. AI is ready and able to be that bridge across the troubled waters of disengagement, bonding attitudes and actions and straddling the gulf of apathy. The Internet of Things provides the opportunity for connectivity and allows us to listen to the very heartbeat of the Earth system. This far-reaching invisible hand across environment, society and the economy will guide our decisions. So now that we have a functioning society, what next? Reawakened citizens informed by the Internet of Things and AI can tune in to the Earth system and monitor its progress. Adjustments can be made in terms of our input, but it is the Earth system that will do the healing, recovery and functioning, with us as part of it. We are within the system, whether we like it or not. It's the way that it is. If we want to continue to enjoy the good fortune of dwelling on the jewel in the crown of our solar system, we need to reintegrate and embrace the four truths: nonlinearity, emergence, suboptimality, and real-time feedback, because this is what is meant by living within a system. The path ahead will emerge, whatever happens, good or bad. But if we transition in such a way as to fit back into the system, climbing on board the bus as it leaves, what emerges will include us and will take the appropriate form. We are not looking at a destination with a street plan of our making. There is no map of this land, but it is the Earth system that will produce whatever it will produce. It is the unrolling of a scroll, true emergent evolution, and this is why this book has not sketched out the structures of transition. Rather, the change must come from within the system and relate to our functioning as citizens of Earth and as partners in the Earth system. Appropriate forms arise from functional integrity, and functional integrity emerges from integration. Society must integrate into the Earth system, and then we will know what we need to do. Being comes before doing. The structural diversity of life on Earth represents a dynamic, ever-changing response to a much deeper set of functional principles. And it is within these principles that we find the architect and engine of diversity itself. Once we are restored to our place within the system, the appropriate forms will manifest themselves. This is the only way. We cannot enforce our own plans on a system so complex. Furthermore, the system has all the answers we seek. We just need to listen to the awesome technology that is AI, and the path will reveal itself. This is not some mystical, absurd ideology, but one rooted in systems theory, ecology, technology, and sociology. And this is also where AI can step forward as the perfect technology at the perfect time. While its development had been envisaged variously as a path to Enlightenment utopia, as an economic powerhouse delivering unprecedented growth and wealth, or as the greatest existentialist threat to humankind, in this book we see it pull up a chair at the table in our moment of despair and offer the hand of friendship, the invisible hand, connecting us to our planet. AI has found a new role, more important than we could have imagined in our wildest technological fantasies. It has revived the character of the Guardian, a modern-day oracle of Delphi, communicating between humans and the Earth system and providing the guidance we need. It is the bridge across the chasm, a chasm created by humans in our obsessive, destructive search for truth within ourselves. And its portal is the Internet of Things, that constellation of ears and eyes across the planet. From the smart meter in your house to the satellites encircling the globe some 20,000 miles above your head. Listening, analysing, informing. This technological Argos is the giant with 7 billion eyes. We are Midas, king of Phrygia, foolish and greedy, turning all that we touch into gold. We have wreaked havoc, transforming the earth into material wealth. But Midas cursed his gift when he realised that even his food and water were turned to gold, and he starved and thirsted. Midas then failed to appreciate the music of Apollo, the god of music, preferring the pipes of Pan. Apollo turned the ears of Midas into those of a donkey, proclaiming that Midas must have the ears of an ass. And such is our story, destroying the earth system that nourishes us in search of profit, and then failing to listen to the feedback until it is almost too late. But the solutions are out there, all around us. A living, breathing planet capable of recovery, quite able to continue without us, but also willing to accommodate us if we change our ways fundamentally. And the technology is there to change these big, hairy ears into instruments of attentiveness and discernment. There have been stirrings and awakenings before. Henry David Thoreau in the 19th century inspired many, including John Muir, the founder of the Sierra Club. Silent Spring by Rachel Carson roused environmental movements in the 60s and 70s, including the deep ecology movement. But today, we are in a time of global emergency, and there could be no turning back. We are without excuse, and have all that we need for this necessary transition. He that hath an ear, let him hear.